This podcast contains potentially sensitive topics. Listener discretion is advised.
This was when I was 22. I'd gotten an internship at a homeless shelter in Chicago. 40 women staying in this particular shelter. What would happen when I started to clean alongside them is, of course, inevitably, they started to share with me. So months, I don't remember, what time, I don't recall how many months it had been that I was cleaning alongside them, where I started to notice a pattern of a bus that would pull up in front of the shelter. All these people would get out of the bus and they would come behind in the kitchen and start making food. And it was, the crew that was volunteered from like a church out in the suburbs that would drive in. A lot of times I would see like people flirting with one another because it was like a singles group that would come and prepare the food. And all these people are coming in. We're cleaning this building. I'm talking to all these women. And one of them looked at me one day and they just said, "Do you have any idea what it feels like to see people being bussed in every day to make food for you? I grew up in this city, in this square block radius, my whole life. Never once have I been asked to be a part of something. Never once have I been asked to offer myself to volunteer on behalf of my community. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" And that was it for me. That changed the trajectory of my life.
I'm Rex Holbein, and welcome to You Know Me Now, a podcast conversation that strives to amplify the unheard voices in our community. In these episodes, I want to remind all of our listeners that the folks who share here do so with a great deal of vulnerability and courage. They share a common hope that by giving all of us a window into their world, they're opening an increased level of awareness, understanding, and perhaps most importantly, a connection within our own community. When responding to complex societal issues, we are all familiar with the shortcomings of treating symptoms rather than causes. Even so, despite knowing this, we also all know how easy it is to go down that path. When an issue is screaming at us, any issue, our knee-jerk reaction is to just make it go away, to make it stop. When the city of Seattle puts up chain-link fencing to keep the homeless out from under freeways and bridges, it is addressing a symptom, the unsightliness of encampments. The fences are meant to make it go away. And we, as a community, passively allow it to happen because in the moment, it feels better to not see what is unsightly. It is literally out of sight, out of mind for us. However, for the homeless, they are still homeless, still looking for a place to sleep and shelter. So how do we shift our focus to successfully addressing root issues rather than symptoms? How do we get past giving in to the knee-jerk responses? We begin by understanding that, for the most part, the symptoms of homelessness are what the housed community feels and are impacted by, and the root causes are what the unhoused community feels and are impacted by. When we respond to symptoms, we need to know that we are responding to our own needs rather than the needs of those struggling. It is an important distinction, an important and necessary shift. When we act compassionately and intentionally with this knowledge, we open ourselves to the uncertainty, to the uncomfortableness of homelessness, and beautifully begin our own journey of addressing the root causes of others struggling. Today I have the sincere pleasure of talking with Sparrow Etter Arlson. Sparrow has been living with intention towards her unhoused neighbors for the last 21 years. She is a co-founder of the Green Bean Coffeeshop, co-founder of Aurora Commons and its SHE clinic, the acronym SHE standing for Safe, Healthy, and Empowered, and the founder of Sacred Streets. Sparrow is now the Seattle Planning Specialist at King County Regional Homelessness Authority. I started my conversation with Sparrow by asking her to share a bit about her childhood. And with that, let's begin.
You know, the first thing that comes to mind for me, Rex, is that I had a different name at that point in my life. My birth name was Lisa. I changed my name to Sparrow when I turned 40. As I sit here and check in with little Lisa, I was living in St. Louis, Missouri, in a part of St. Louis that is called University City, right down the street from Washington University, a very diverse area. So my parents were curious folks, so we always had people at our house. I was listening to adult conversations that were fueled with curiosity and kindness and an openness. Little Lisa would go outside, play outside a lot, put on plays. Overall, a pretty lovely childhood. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like you felt very loved and
I did. I
felt allowed to explore how you want.
I did. Yeah, loved and seen, valued. I had the means to work out different identities by trying out different sports and dance, etc. So I feel really grateful that and I don't take that lightly, that I had a safe place of expression and care. But little Lisa at 5 definitely felt safe and secure. Of course, like most children, I had a loss of innocence at some point in my life, but that was certainly not at 5.
We're going to get to that.
We'll get to that. Yeah, that was not at 5. 5 was a sweet and tender time in my life.
A lot of the times when I get to talk to people have had traumatic childhoods, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm always curious to know, like, how you lived as growing up. How did it inform now? And so it's easy to connect a dot, like to say, wow, Lisa had this unbelievably beautiful childhood, and it's a direct link to, like this wonderful, beautiful humanitarian work that you do now. And is that a fair? And I want to be careful. Stop me if I'm jumping too far ahead. But
no. Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, through the years, Rex, I'm sure you get this as well. Like living into this world the way that I've chosen to live into this world, right? Through like birthing a number of different nonprofits that have been alongside my unhoused neighbors. That's always been a question of like, why? It's really hard for me to answer that question. I mean, tears always come because it's something I can't totally answer other than like my shared humanity, like the ways that I have felt seen, the lived out experience of being alongside my unhoused neighbors, the realness of which they have to approach this life, the shared need, the way that they care for one another, the fabric of care. I feel more myself when I'm with human beings that don't have the privilege of hiding their shit behind 4 walls. The ways that I was taught about faith and religion never matched up to what was within my soul. And so, like, if you were to ask my sister about our childhood, she would say a very different experience than I had of my childhood, because I've always been a mystic. I've never taken what's been told to me and had it. I don't process information in the same way that many people process it.
Out the same way it went in.
Yeah,
you came in and you turned it
and
over.
I turned it around, and I mean I can't even put words to that, right? Because that's just the way that I've been wired.
Was it just you growing and moving one step forward into your own mystic kind of spiritual connection with the world, or were you even yet that connected to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was really connected to it, but in a way and in a sense that just, I mean, we all feel lonely, right? Like we all have a sense of being alone. But I think I never felt like alone. I just felt lonely. Like I didn't feel like I didn't feel like there was any constructs of which I could be like understood.
We always relate to these moments. I think, at least I do. Like like, okay, listening to what you just said and then internalizing it, comparing it to my journey, right? Like, and I feel like your words are similar in a sense that I wish I could say I was a mystic and I wish I could say those beautiful things like that. But I do resonate with the feeling of like, I felt connected growing up, but I also felt like it somehow seemed like a lie. Like it didn't seem quite right. Like something was, something was wrong. And, I think now I can put words to it much more easily, but going through it, I was just kind of a happy kid growing up, right? And it was kind of like, I'm sensitive, I can cry easily, grew up with 4 sisters, no brothers, so I had all these, more maybe, but point is, I can relate to that, to the feeling of not being disconnected, but alone within a lot of people, actually.
Yeah. I share this story, and I have shared this story, with many people. It's such a privilege to share this story because I think we all have these good teachers, right? Like there's a reason why Rex is here doing this podcast. There's a reason why I'm here as Sparrow. We've had good teachers that have been kind enough to be patient with us and share their stories. This is a story from my life where I happen to have like kind of my first initial good teachers in this work. This was when I was 21 or 22. I'd gotten an internship right out of undergrad at a homeless shelter in Chicago through an organization called Breakthrough Urban Ministries. Really, really beautiful. My internship was working with youth that at that point there were still the projects. So this was before the projects were shut down, and really enjoyed that. When my internship was up, I wanted to stay on, and I asked at this particular women's shelter, if there were any particular jobs that were available because I wanted to stay and work for the organization. There were no jobs available except for the janitor position. And so I decided to stay, and I was lucky enough that they gave me the janitor position because I didn't know anything about cleaning. So you can imagine this is 40 women staying in this particular shelter. So 9 toilets, a lot happening during the day in this particular congregate shelter, and a 22-year-old girl that I was now in charge of the facilities. Like I'd gone from being like a quote unquote case manager or someone that was in kind of an over and above relationship with youth that were coming to the shelter during the day. It was a drop-in. But I was also there during the day and didn't get to encounter the women very much. Or when I tried to, I just couldn't build much relationship or rapport. What would happen when I started to clean alongside them is, of course, inevitably, they started to share with me. So months, I don't remember, what time, I don't recall how many months it had been that I was cleaning alongside them, where I started to notice a pattern of a bus that would pull up in front of the shelter. All these people would get out of the bus and they would come behind in the kitchen and start making food. And it was, the crew that was volunteered from like a church out in the suburbs that would drive in. And a lot of times I would see like people flirting with one another because it was like a singles group that would come and prepare the food. And I just noticed, God, like all these people are coming in. We're cleaning this building. I'm talking to all these women. And one of them looked at me one day and they just said, "Do you have any idea what it feels like to see people being bussed in every day to make food for you? I grew up in this city, in this like square block radius, my whole life. Never once have I been asked to be a part of something. Never once have I been asked to like offer myself to volunteer on behalf of my community. Like, do you have any idea what that feels like?"
Yeah.
And that was it for me. That changed. That changed the trajectory of my life.
Yeah, because you saw the separation, the loneliness.
I saw, they are my good teachers. Like, I am so grateful to those women for sharing that because the rest of my life has been truly a direct response to that moment in time.
That's beautiful, honestly. I don't think people see that, right? Like in kind of any way. Like it's very hard to always also be on the receiving end, like never, like just to have people come and give and not have something to give back or to be included on that end of it. That's
to never be told that you're needed in this world for this world.
Yeah.
I think is one of the greatest poverties of all.
Yeah. I think it's central to some of the kind of stepping stones for people to get involved. Like, what are those little first feelings? Like, how do I like get off of my path to help someone that's struggling with theirs? Like, what does that look like? How do I wake up one day and decide to do that? And I think we all need those little moments or those little kind of pearls of wisdom like that. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you kept working there.
I did. I worked there, and I would have stayed there a lot longer. But my at that point in my life, my parents were living back in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I got a call that my dad was sick and dying. So I left Chicago and moved back to be with my my dad as he was passing away. Oh. Yeah. So I was able to spend the next, it was about 11 months caring for my father and saying the long goodbye.
Yeah.
So.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am too.
Did you know yet what you wanted to be doing in life at that point? Was that 11-month also a reflection time for you?
Totally was. Yeah, that was a real time of, again, being 22, and so many of my friends were out living their life, and mine was really different at that point, right? Like I was very much attuned and aware, again, of like the fleetingness of this life, the power of a moment. Things really become clear when you're having to say goodbye to someone you love at, I'm certainly not, I wasn't like so young, but I was
pretty young.
I was pretty young, and I was able to be really attuned in that season. And I think so much of that is because I had just come from working in a women's shelter where the women, again, were kind enough to share their struggle with me and their story, and then to go back and be alongside my dad as he was dying. It was in a thin place, right? It was a thin place for me.
Raw.
And I was raw, and I was able to, in those moments, take what my good teachers at the shelter had shown me and reflect on my time working at the shelter. And it was during that time that I really did get a vision for a nonprofit coffee shop. It was at that time that I had a connection here with a local church that wanted to do church a little bit differently. And I had shared with them this vision I had for a nonprofit coffee shop. And they really loved it.
Tell us the name.
The Green Bean Coffeeshop.
So the first obvious question is, like, why a nonprofit coffee house? Like, tell us what's different about this. Like, why isn't it just a for-profit coffee spot?
For me, my line of thinking was there are no third places, right? Like, churches are not that place for folks. Like, coffee shops aren't totally that place for folks because they're not always welcoming to folks that are sleeping rough, that are unhoused, but they could be.
Yep.
And I think the other part of it was that I wanted to give individuals a way to be a part of something. So we had our tip jar supported local and global nonprofits. So anyone who walked in, we had a nonprofit board, like a nonprofit of the month. They could come in and they could learn about different nonprofits that were local and global, right? And anyone could come in. So Joel, who I knew who slept outside, or Robert, who slept on our back porch, they could come in and they could give a penny, 5 cents. They could learn about something, a narrative that was greater than themselves. And also they could help clean the space. They could be a part of the space. And they could stay in the space.
So it was all-inclusive space.
It was an all-inclusive space. So we didn't make chairs that were uncomfortable. We didn't We didn't have like a certain number that we needed to reach on a day-to-day basis. We wanted folks to come and feel a part of something. And that was the Green Bean.
And were you working there every day?
Oh, yes.
Probably more.
Oh, my goodness, Rex. Yes. Yes, it was. It was such a beautiful, beautiful season of life.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful, hard season of life. But, we had many programs that were birthed out of the Green Bean, again, accessible to all people.
Yeah.
People really cared for one another. It was a beautiful fabric of care that happened within those four walls.
Yeah. I imagine, but I want to hear you talk about it.
Yeah.
The housed community and the unhoused community, right? Like that's where I think that's where the special sauce is.
That is where the special sauce is.
Like where all the mixing happens and where all the learning and the growth for
Mm-hmm.
both, right? Both communities.
100%.
Did you see that taking place in the Green Bean?
And that's why it was created.
Yeah.
That was totally why it was created.
Yeah.
Was to try to figure out a leveled out space where folks from all walks of life could come and live as though we belong to one another. And it takes a lot of artistry to create a space like that and tend to a space like that.
And courage, of course.
Yeah.
So tell me about these early thoughts for the Aurora Commons. And I got to say, the Aurora Commons, I think, started about the same time I started facing homelessness. Mm-hmm. And so about a year or so later, I started hearing cross-pollinating things. Like I'd hear about Aurora Commons, I go, oh, right? Like it felt like we were
kindred spirits.
Separated at birth or something,
absolutely.
Right? It just felt like it was the same kind of feelings were being put out into the world. And so, I've always held this really beautiful place in my heart for Aurora Commons and the work that you guys did do and are still doing there.
Oh, yeah.
So, but tell me like the early birthing of the Commons.
I mean, I wish that, a whole chorus of people could be here, right? Like you're getting one note in the chorus from me. There's so many people that were a part of birthing the Aurora Commons. And that's what makes it so beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Like it was birthed in community, and it was birthed out of a desire to share life with our neighbors that are experiencing homelessness.
And Aurora is a tough spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me back up. All cities are tough spots for the homeless, right?
Yeah.
But Aurora is a particularly difficult spot. Did you choose that spot particularly for a reason? Was there? Yeah,
well, I think it's where we were all living as a community. So, as I mentioned, the Green Bean was in Greenwood, which Greenwood, is right next to Aurora Avenue, North Aurora. The Aurora Commons physical space is at 90th and Aurora. The Green Bean was at 86th and Greenwood. Yep. So all of us that helped to create the Aurora Commons all lived within like a block or two radius of Aurora Avenue and had for 15 plus years at that point.
I see.
The Aurora Commons started, many years before we had a brick and mortar building. So the original start to the Aurora Commons and kind of the movement of the loving community of Awake Church started spending their time with intention at the motels on Aurora.
Mm. And was that just like hanging out in the lobby or going into rooms and saying, hey, and sitting, do you want to chat? Or
a little bit of both. But what's really beautiful, Rex, is that my beloved sister, Karen, who's one of the co-founders of the Aurora Commons, she started back in 2008, 2009, simply taking bouquets of flowers to the motel managers on Aurora Avenue between 85th and 100th.
Yep.
So she just started by bringing flowers and saying hi with the deep acknowledgement that we know that those people that were running the motels, all that was happening in the motels, like those were precious people that were very isolated. They were in and out of homelessness, right? So just being present, bringing beauty. I know you of all people know how important beauty is and the lack of beauty that our friends who have to sleep outside they don't have much access to beauty. So to lead with beauty was always at the forefront of, I don't want to call it a movement because shouldn't be a movement. I look forward to the day where it's no longer called a movement or radical hospitality, but it's just simply loving your neighbor. So Karen started by bringing flowers. Then we started doing barbecues that we would host in the parking lots of the hotels. Folks from all walks of life would come together and share meals. And then my husband and I had moved directly behind what is now the brick and mortar Aurora Commons on 90th and Aurora. So it was right next to what is the Oak Tree Motel
Yep.
on Nesbitt Avenue.
Okay.
So Aurora Commons is here on Aurora.
Yep.
Big parking lot.
Yep. With a little house in
A
the back.
little house in the back.
Yep.
My husband and I lived there.
Oh, wow.
And so there's two houses. There's one house in the back. There's one right next to it. And then there's the Oak Tree Motel. Okay. Yep. Jade Chinese Restaurant, Aurora Commons. We were not Aurora Commons yet. We had a little house here. And that house, it was a fourplex, happened to have a yard. So rare, right? To have a green space. Like a yard.
Yeah.
We said, oh, let's do a garden. Let's do a neighborhood garden. So myself and Karen and Ben and all the founders of Aurora Commons and our beloved community that were gathering and trying to be church together, we started doing a neighborhood garden in our backyard. So then, next thing you know, of course, right? We have a whole community of folks digging their hands in the dirt, creating this space. And then we started doing neighborhood barbecues. So we went from doing them in the parking lot to in my backyard. And I'm not kidding. We would have 50 to 100 individuals in our backyard every Wednesday. For 2 summers we did that.
That's beautiful.
And it was the most beautiful thing. And again, I look forward to the day where I don't have people coming to the backyard or people coming and saying, oh, this is radical hospitality. It's not. It's not.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, my brain went, when you were finishing up that little portion of the story, my brain said, can you imagine if that was happening around the whole city all the time, right? Like if that's kind of what we were all just making normal.
Yeah. It's just a little lived out expression of, just the fabric of love, like how better we are to be together in that and create together. And so that, what happened is every year it would start to rain in the fall. And we would miss being with one another. So we started our first Aurora Commons program in my house. It was a women's breakfast. And so my neighbors that slept out in their RVs and out in their tents, because we had a lot of people sleeping on Nesbitt at that time, they would come over and we would create and make breakfast together and share in a meal together. That was our first women's breakfast. And then we saw the building come up for lease. We said, what if we took what we've been doing and put 4 walls around it and did it all the time?
Yeah.
So
Awake moved into the building as well. Mm-hmm. So you kind of were doing 2 things. Mm-hmm. You were beginnings of Aurora Commons right alongside Awake.
That's right.
And probably cross
Awake,
filtering was
Awake
the same.
Birthed all of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We like to say Awake was kind of the goose that hatched the egg of Aurora Commons, and the egg got way too big. The goose had to get off,
That's funny.
But we totally renovated that whole space.
Yeah.
Rex, all by ourselves, with our own hands, in community.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's, I could see you any person pulling the energy from that your entire life long, having that experience, honestly.
To tie it back to my good teachers from the women's shelter in Chicago. When we started the Aurora Commons, when we designed the space and made it, the only thing we knew and the only thing we started off with was having a shared kitchen. So we wanted the kitchen to be accessible to everyone. So we would stock the kitchen with food, but people would come in and they'd get to open the fridge and they'd get to make their own food.
People on the street.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That was the only thing we started with, Rex. We had no programs. We had nothing.
Yep.
Just a neighborhood living room where folks can come in and they get to choose what they want to create with their own hands.
Yeah.
No us serving them.
Yeah.
You walk in, you don't know who's working, who's not working. And that's not a simple thing, right? It's like being a parent. Your kids shouldn't know how hard you work. They shouldn't know how hard you work to make their life beautiful and flourishing.
That's a really profoundly beautiful beginnings. Mm-hmm. I think about the early phases of facing homelessness in my architecture office. It wasn't facing homelessness yet, right? But one of the most beautiful things that happened is that people were coming into my architecture office to use the bathroom, get coffee, peanut butter, whatever, right? Or sit and just read in the lobby there. And they weren't coming into a social service place. They were coming into an architect's office. And that little tiny distinction to the people coming in, they could walk in standing up straight. They weren't
Right.
coming in broken.
Right.
Like, oh, I'm broken and I need your help. They were just coming in to mix and be, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that wasn't designed. I wish I could, say, oh, that was some brainchild idea. It wasn't until later that I
That you realized, yeah.
oh, wow, that is what's working
Yeah.
here. And this is where I was musing about, like, all these beautiful beginnings for all the things that people turn into nonprofits is then they grow. And they have to because
You and I know a thing about that.
they have
Yeah.
to because they want to do more of the beautiful that they're doing.
Yeah, that's
And with
right.
it, they need structure, they need guidelines and rules, and slowly it starts becoming something that's not as approachable. And it's not a criticism on any of the nonprofits. Certainly it's not a criticism of facing homelessness and how it's grown,
Yeah.
but it's just a reality.
Nor
right?
Aurora Commons.
Yeah.
But same.
Yeah. It's why it needs to keep being reborn and reborn, because
That's right.
that, for me
Yeah.
at least,
Yeah.
the really human, beautiful moments are when a stranger does something kind and loving for another stranger, and it just becomes this little beautiful thing, and other people join, and they want to also be part of it, and before it gets legs, I guess. I don't know.
There's a sense where, like, I picture a breath that needs to be nourished across all of our social services at this particular point in time. They're very malnourished of soul. And again, understandably so.
Yeah.
People are there ever since COVID. And prior to that even, no one has a margin
Yeah.
to be imaginative, to be creative, and they deserve it.
Yeah.
They deserve that from us.
Yeah, they do. One of the things that shocked me when I started early on, I got calls from case managers that said, you're getting too close to the people you're serving. I said, like, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
And they said, you're setting yourself up for disappointing and hurting people that are vulnerable. And it went against my kind of inner feelings about, like, what was missing is that we actually need to get closer. Instead of pushing away, we need to get closer. And I don't even begin to think I have the answers on how that works when it scales. But I just know person to person, there's too much separation, and people feel that are extremely vulnerable and extremely hurting. They need a hug, they need someone to listen, they need someone to be really close to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And where are the spaces where they have they have the privilege of the lived out experience of being in relationship, of naming themselves? I mean, I think one of the main things I think about a lot, Rex, is, and I thought about this a lot at the Commons. That was a big part of why we set it up in the way that we did, with the neighborhood living room feel, the kitchen, the shared kitchen, was that when you go to social services, quite often they have a list of ways that they want you to name yourself. Where are the places where they can come up with their own name? Do you know what I mean? Like, rather than checking a box of, like, oh, I slept here last night, or I'm this, or I'm that.
Yeah.
Like, where can they go where they can live out a new name, a new possibility? It's so important to create those spaces where they don't have to come in and say they're one thing or another.
Yeah, they can just be.
They can just be. That's a lot of work on our part, though.
Yeah.
It takes more work to create a space like that than to create a space that is full of a bunch of rules. And again, I'm with you.
And boxes to check.
And boxes to check. Now, there's nothing easy about that. And you're right. It's not super scalable. But there can also be people in this world that are committed to a way of seeing, a way of restoring, that I think we need to put more belief, more weight behind these kinds of social movements that are kind of a special assist to our social services.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do. I mean, often when I get into these types of conversations, which I'm grateful for, is that I get to a point where we're working in this arena, and we're up against this, and these people over here are doing that, and there comes a point where I almost want to say, no matter how hard you're going to push or try to change within this arena, it just keeps going around and around, and it's almost like we need to go to another arena. And by that I mean, I look at all of the services that are being provided. It's not like there isn't effort going on. There's a lot of effort, but I feel like what's missing in a big part is community, where it's kind of a cultural thing. Like we all take part in the Aurora Commons living room. Like not physically where Aurora Commons is, but we all have that space. And I think at that point it changes overnight, right? Like it's a cultural shift, and that cultural shift is huge.
It is.
And almost feels like it needs to be another arena. Like I look at the way we do things now, and I think, wow, how do we get there from where we are, imagining it in this box? It's like I want to go over here, and I don't know what that means, other than maybe it's an awareness of, wow, how much of a task it is, because I don't believe we're going to get there unless we all kind of see each other in the way that you're talking about.
I think of a couple things when you say that. Is Joanna Macy, who has done a lot of work in translating Rainier Maria Rilke's poetry. She calls it deep time work. And I think about that a lot. Who are the people out here that are telling, just in Seattle, we'll just say Seattle, that are telling a new story? Who is pointing us in the direction of a new North Star?
Yeah.
We don't.
What is that?
What is the new story? And I think that's extremely important.
We don't even know
work.
the direction, because we don't even know what the star is.
Right, exactly. No, exactly. And so I think that's why it's so important, the work that you're doing, Rex, and the work that I hope that Sacred Streets can be a part of, is it's building a bridge across otherness. How can we turn and face one another?
Yeah.
It's no simple task to tell a new story. But a new story is exactly what needs to be told.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's exactly what needs to be told.
Yeah. Do you think we all feel that? Do you think we're just to tell that story? Do you think are we all lined up waiting for that? It's just that a lot of folks don't know how to take that first step, but are we primed for it? You know how like when an idea bursts, everybody goes, "Oh my God, that's it right there." Do you think we're ready for it? Mystic friend.
I know. I do. I think the time is now. I really do. I feel that in my bones. I'm closing my eyes, listeners. I'm closing my eyes. I feel it deep in my bones. But it's so particular, right? Like it. First of all, the fact is, there is a very lived out decompensation of precious people that's happening within our city right now. And that lived out decompensation of our unhoused neighbors, it's a reflection of our inability on so many levels as an entire society to have nuanced conversations.
Yeah.
It's just true.
Yeah. It's so refreshing when you find those conversations.
Right,
they're rare.
Like, what we need is a group of people, again, committed to the belief that people can change, both in thought and theory. People need to believe that they can have conversations with people that are different than them, where we can create something together. We can change, and we can be open to change.
I love that.
There's not a lot of humans that I come across in this very, for speaking so much against being a binary society, I've never experienced more of a binary society. The ins and outs, the Republican, the Democrat, the liberal, the not liberal, this or that. Where are the people that are building a bridge?
Yeah.
We need more bridge builders, Rex. Like, I truly believe that with my whole heart. And the people that are suffering the most are the folks that we're seeing, the folks that are sleeping outside.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're suffering emotionally and physically, but I would say too, people living inside suffer from what you're talking about immensely.
100%.
You know, that's the loneliness that you were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me about Sacred Streets.
Sacred Streets is a commitment to building a bridge across otherness. And that is a commitment to like storytelling in a way that I think I like to call it like the phenomenology of the other. So kind of taking the experiences alongside folks that I've known for 20 years that have been sleeping, that have had to sleep outside, that are continuing to sleep outside. It's me sharing their story in a way that doesn't deduce it to reason, but really is outside of reason. So I want folks to...
And outside of reason, I'm guessing you mean it resides in emotion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's my hope, at least.
Yeah. And how are you wanting to tell these stories?
I mean, I think it goes back to like just the way that I was created at birth, and that's just being a mystic, like just mystical encounters with the other. So I think, for me, like so much of my life alongside my neighbors who are experiencing homelessness has been lived out in a very particular ecosystem, and that's on Aurora Avenue. And so to highlight that particular place and the particular precious people by sharing their stories is one good medicine for me. I have to get these stories out of my body.
Yeah.
They're seeping out of me. I have to memorialize the folks that I've lost, which is far too many. I have to make meaning out of their lives. And I hope that the ways that I steward their stories honors them and awakens the reader and the people to their own need.
It resonates with me that often when we hear these stories, or however they shape, whether they're written or they're photos or they're videos, they end up opening something within yourself that actually is very telling to what you need in your own life. This has never sounded quite right, but I haven't found the right words to put it into, but I've felt like the homeless stories that you hear are gifts to the housed to actually self-examine.
Like, absolutely.
In lots of ways. Like if you turn away from it, then you can ask yourself, okay, why am I turning away? What's within me that has me turning away from this story? Or if I come closer to it, what is it in me? And it's an invitation to self-examination. In both of those experiences, coming closer or moving away.
Yeah.
How are you doing this though? How are you? Are you doing it in writing? Or are you doing it in?
Yeah, in writing. Yeah, so I'm writing a lot, and when I'm able to, I'm sharing that with folks that want to read it. Real Changes. I've been grateful for them, and I feel the most honored when they share my stories. So they've been able to share a number of my articles, and I'll continue to share in that way. Sacred Streets also has been in community with mental health chaplaincy. And the hope is to continue to work with faith communities in equipping them with this companionship training.
Yeah.
Because we know, I know you know, and I know many people who are listening and who are committed to this work, this good, hard work, know that soul care is a really, really crucial part of this work. We really want to create a big pool of individuals that are trained in accompaniment, that are trained in soul care, that can start partnering with these social services
Yeah.
to go in and care for the beloved humans that are living, at the tiny house villages, at our permanent supportive housing, and also care for the staff
Yeah.
that are hurting and burnt out
Yeah.
and not equipped well. I think, one thing I'm really aware of, Rex, and you may not be aware of, other people may not be aware of, is that just even in this last year, there's been a 30% increase in overdose fatalities within our permanent supportive housing units. Folks are getting indoors. We've seen this a long time.
Mm-hmm.
They're closing their doors and they're dying
Yeah.
because they're lonely. They're isolated. They have no sense of community. We need to create a whole community of people that are committed to being in relationship with our precious friends that are both sleeping outside and also transitioning into homes, which can often be
Isolating.
the most isolating experience of all, because they don't have that lived out community on the street, that lived out meaning making, for better or worse, where everybody has a job. Everybody has a hustle. So we as a community need to come around and, for way lack of a better word, adopt these organizations. And so that's something that we're working with mental health chaplaincy on, is doing these trainings to equip house neighbors to come alongside our unhoused neighbors on the street and in that crucial time of transition where all of a sudden, again, they have that door.
Yeah. Yeah, they've left.
And they don't have anyone knocking on it.
Yeah, albeit a difficult and often dysfunctional community.
Yep.
They still had a community
That's
on the street.
That's exactly right.
And
that's exactly right.
Yep. Now they're off. Now they've moved 5 miles away into a building on the 4th floor.
Yep.
And they're separated.
Yep. So Sacred Streets is that's one of our goals, and then the other is a deep commitment to social artistry. Okay, I wish I had my notes in front of me. I'm sorry, Jean Houston. Not that she's really going to hear this, but she created the field of social artistry, and it's essentially that you approach social dilemmas as an artist would. It's quite simple, really, but with the precision of an artist.
Yeah.
With the creativity of an artist. The openness of an artist.
Yeah.
And that's been really helpful for me. In every conversation, in every attempt that we have to, like, quote unquote, solve homelessness or come up with particular models of care, it's to come at it through the lens of an artist. And to be committed to that. In every conversation I have, along with individuals that are trying to come up with their own models of care. How do we care for the precious other who's sleeping rough? To help them reimagine, to help them be imaginative, not just stick with, a transactional model of care, but to really deprofessionalize.
Yeah, deprofessionalize, absolutely. That was something that we used to say at Facing Homelessness, was that you didn't have to know the answer to begin, right? And I think that is a very artist point of view.
Totally,
right? You actually rely on the creative design process.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, I'm going to collect information, and we're going to discover the solution as we go.
Yeah, it's a co-creation.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about soul care. Like, what are some foundational cornerstones of soul care, like just that you could peel off the top of your head? What does that look like to Sparrow?
I think soul care is a deep reverence for the other, approaching the other as a mystery, as not something to be solved, not something to be solved, but something to be like someone to be in awe of. I think that, even though I'm talking about it now with my eyes closed, like there's a sense where it's like it's the hand on the heart, right? Like it's asking and being, like, attentive to kind of the unmeasurable of the precious human in front of you. Yeah. So it's a commitment to the beauty, the encounter.
I think of when you were talking earlier, when we first started, about, feeling that we all feel lonely, and that it wasn't quite fitting for you as you were growing up. You were loved, you were surrounded by people. I feel like I'm always looking for that connection. You also said this earlier, which really resonated with me, is that, I can't remember your exact words, but it was about unhidden beauty or openness that people on the street seem to have. Like there's an authenticity there that is, and this is nothing negative against people living inside, but there is something very genuinely, beautifully authentic in people outside that, for whatever reason, opens me more.
That's right.
And I think your discussion about soul care, yeah, that's a very good thing for everybody, I think, to reflect on. Like where, like, am I taking part in that journey? You know?
Yeah, and I think there's also there's a sense that feels really honoring to me, Rex, because I think for me, when I think about soul care, when I think about being a soulful human, when I think about, animating soul, being present to the precious other who's experiencing homelessness, there's a sense where I feel like I have to risk more, and they're worthy of my risk. Do you know? I guess the way that I want to say it is like, I think we have such we've been trained, right? We've been trained how to volunteer. We've been trained that there's certain things that we have to do, right? Or we sign up to volunteer and we have a job when we go volunteer. There's something very wildernessly and wild about soul care.
Yep.
There's no book that you can pick up.
Yeah.
You're truly
Yeah.
just in the face of the other.
Yep.
And there's a sense where it requires something of me, where I can make a fool of myself.
Yeah.
And they're worthy of
Or
that.
I can get hurt.
Or I can get hurt because they can tell me, don't touch me.
Yeah.
Or no, bitch, I didn't mean that. Like, fair. Like, there's something like...
And then I've got to deal with that.
And then I've got to deal with that.
Yeah.
And I've got to, like, there's something in that feels so honoring.
God, thank you for putting that into words for me. I feel exactly the same way. I've wondered a lot about, we started this Just Say Hello campaign, right? Mm-hmm. And I wondered, why is that so difficult for a lot of people? And I think it's because most of the back and forth that we have in society are fairly scripted. Mm-hmm. Hey, how's it going? It's going good. How was the weekend? Mm-hmm. How about those Mariners, huh? Mm-hmm. There are all these little bits and pieces that you can meet somebody in the elevator or walking up the steps or whatever, and they're pretty prescribed exchanges, and nothing in those exchanges are going to challenge you. Mm-hmm. But if you say hello to somebody that's struggling, now the guardrails are off.
That's right.
Anything can come back, and you've got to now actually kind of look inside and say, how do I feel about that? It's not just in my head. It's like, I gotta actually check in on this.
That's right.
And I think that's a more difficult and more rewarding
I agree.
journey.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that, one of the things that I feel really, it's always, again, hard to talk about, but I feel really proud of us at Aurora Commons and continue to feel proud of how this is being lived out at the Aurora Commons without me there even, is that we show up, like we respond.
Yeah.
Like, I think we're trained to like, I mean, hearkening back to kind of what you said earlier, like case managers or other people tell us not to get too close. There's something so honoring when you weep and wail. Mm-hmm. When someone relapses. I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with it because I know you. I know you. I've known you for 5 years.
Yeah, I love you.
And I love you.
Yeah. Okay. You're a unique person. I'm going to just say it. And I know I'm not the first person to tell you that. Like, just the way that you care from your heart and the way that you want to lean into and see the issue of people struggling on the streets. That's beautiful and unique, and you have a gift, let's just say, for it. But that's not everybody, right? But I also wonder about the people listening to this who kind of don't bring that mindset. And what are those starter kit entry points for people to begin that journey of their soul artistry or their soul caring? Do you have insights into that? And I know you're a teacher as well. Like, this is part, right? This is part of your Sacred Streets is helping educate people how to step forward.
so much of the work is work that we need to do together as a community. I think that I often say that we wouldn't have so many folks, so many precious folks that are sleeping outside if we were in each other's business more in our neighborhoods.
So get closer.
Get closer to your neighbor.
Yeah.
And I don't mean your unhoused neighbor. I mean, we don't even notice. Like, we don't even know our neighbors. Like, if we were in each other's business, we would know when a kiddo's not safe at home. We would know when someone's hurting.
Yeah.
And it's those people that often end up outside. We gotta get in each other's business more.
Mm-hmm. The question remains, how do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is missing in our culture that is keeping us from doing that? Like, why are we not doing that? What are we so afraid of? What?
Yeah. Well, I think in large part, honestly, like, it's our white heteronormative culture. We don't have a shared communal story. I mean, if you look at just even like the invention of harm reduction movement, all that came out of Black communities during the crack epidemic. They care for one another. There's a communal need for one another. We don't have a shared need for one another. So I think...
So we're just fragmenting.
We're fragmented. We don't have a shared need for one another. If you also look, I think I talked to a lot of white women about this, myself included. There's so many ways that we look in the mirror and all we see is our own face. I see my lines across my face. And I'm told over and over again that these are the ointments or the treatments that I have to use to keep myself from aging. I'm told that so often that I can't even look past my own face in the mirror anymore. I have to stop and I have to be intentional about not wanting quick fixes to my own pain, to my own suffering, to my own desire to not die someday. When I'm really intentional about that, then I see the person in front of me and I see that I need them. There is a discipline that we have to be committed to. We have to be disciplined people.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of work to look past our own face in the mirror and see the precious other, to live as though we belong to one another, to live as though we need one another, when everything in our cultural narrative is telling us the other.
Yeah. Thank you for talking with me.
Thank you for talking with me.
Yeah.
You are beloved.
The issue of homelessness is complex and overwhelming for everyone. So much so that many of us turn away from the moments where and when it comes closest to us. In those moments, though, there is an opportunity to look into the eyes of someone struggling, to hear their voice, to feel some of their pain. And in that moment, an opportunity to shift homelessness from how it impacts you to how it is impacting this person in front of you. You Know Me Now is produced, written, and edited by Tomas Bernatsky and me, Rex Holbein. We would like to give a heartfelt thank you to Sparrow for taking the time to speak with us. You Know Me Now has a Facebook and Instagram page where you can join in on the conversation. We also have a website at www.youknowmenow.com where you can see photos of Sparrow and the other programs that we host, such as photojournal stories, Artist Spotlight, and our podcast. Thanks as always for listening.